All right, one last look at your traffic and weather from the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Center on your Monday here on the early game. Looking right now, not too many things happening in and around the Columbia area as far as traffic is concerned. Do have one disabled vehicle at George Rogers Boulevard and Assembly Street, and then another disabled vehicle at I-77 southbound near exit number 1. Taking a quick peek at your weather, it's going to be nice and sunny today. High is going to get all the way up to 85 degrees. Currently sitting at 70 here in downtown Columbia on the early game. Oh, 9 o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry along with you here on the game. First Monday of June. We've broken into a new month. Means we are that much closer to the start of the college football season. Jack, a lot to get into over the course of the next hour. You're also going to be hopping here with me from noon to 3 as well, as Terry Ford is out of town for the week for his son's graduation. So how are we doing today?
Good, man. I'm glad to be here. And who does he think he is taking off days and stuff for his son's graduation?
It's selfish is what it is.
It really is. But in all seriousness, congrats to Terry's son. That's awesome to be graduating. Any level is. The one that I don't really understand the whole graduation system from is middle school.
Okay.
That's more moving up to me. But high school and beyond, that's a real big accomplishment right there.
I don't think we had like a middle school graduation. We had like a ceremony where you got like, hey, if you were like the best in science or math, like you got like a certificate if you had perfect attendance, but like it wasn't like a graduation, I wouldn't call it, if I remember correctly.
I think we did the same sort of thing. We didn't do like caps and gowns and stuff. However, I have heard of people that have had to do that for middle school before, which I think is a little bit absurd. But again, high school, college, anything beyond that, that's a big accomplishment right there. And but I'm glad to fill in for Terry this week, and looking forward to spending a few extra hours most this week just talking different sports, honestly.
A very busy weekend on the baseball front, which we'll get into in just a second. But I got to start with this. It has been the topic of the morning with Bill and Preston. Coach Beamer, when he was on with Jay and Elijah, on Friday on the post-game show, talked about singing karaoke with recruits this weekend. Because apparently that is a big part of recruiting weekends when it comes to Coach Beamer in South Carolina. I got to know, if Jack Veltri is singing karaoke, what are we singing?
I don't know. That's a good question. Probably like, I'm trying to think of something that would be good. Maybe like something like Billy Joel or something. Like I don't know, man. That's a great question.
Have you sung karaoke before, like in public?
I don't think so. Honestly, no. I don't think so. What about you?
I've done it one time. It was at the prior radio station that I worked at for our Christmas party. Everybody had a few drinks. I felt confident enough. I don't have a good singing voice, right? But I feel if I dial my southern accent up to 11, it can mask my inefficiencies when it comes to straight singing. So my go-to song, and this is what I sang, is Cruise by Florida Georgia Line. Because the guys in Florida Georgia Line, I don't know if you know this, when you sing, you're not supposed to have an accent. Like, singing neutralizes voices, right? That's why you can listen to a British band and they sound the same as an American band, because singing neutralizes your accent, right? Well, Florida Georgia Line intentionally sings with a country accent. Like, they do that on purpose to give more twang to it or whatever. And I'm like, okay, that's my song. I know it by heart, and I can use my accent to mask my inefficiencies as a singer. So that's my go-to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love Florida Georgia Line, so that makes sense. And if you put a few drinks in me, I'm probably feeling like I can go out there and do it. But yeah, definitely, I have not done it, so maybe someday that'll change.
Well, pro tip: if you ever want to use that song, it's good. Everybody knows it; they can sing along, and it helps if everybody's had a few drinks.
Yeah, good on Shane for doing karaoke with these guys. I do wonder what he's singing with them these days.
He mentioned, it was one of the Sam Hunt songs. I forget what the name of it was. We'll get into it later in the day for sure. But he's a big country guy. It sounds like.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. That's so cool.
We'll get into plenty of that as the day rolls along. But first, it is a big weekend from a baseball standpoint. But we'll focus locally here on South Carolina first because the transfer portal is officially open, which we'll get into in just a second. We've got to start things off with our Sandstorm Pick-Me-Up.
Time to get hyped.
Here's your 9 a.m. Sandstorm.
Sponsored by George Sink Injury Lawyers. Just call all nines.
It is time for your 9 a.m. Sandstorm Pick-Me-Up, brought to you by South Carolina's largest injury law firm, George Sink Injury Lawyers. If you've been hurt in the car or at work, call George Sink now at 803-ALL-9. It's going to be a wacky weekend of baseball from regional standpoint, but our focus is going to start here locally with South Carolina as the transfer portal has officially opened for baseball. Will be open for the next month, and as we kind of expected, you're going to start losing some guys to it. And this weekend, at last count, unless somebody's jumped in the past 10 hours or so, 4 new guys entering the portal this weekend.
Yeah, I don't think anyone else has opened. Or I'm sorry, not opened, or decided to enter the portal overnight. But last I counted, they have 9 guys in the portal right now. Now, to be fair, I don't think any of them are. I mean, Tyler Pitzer is a kind of a big loss. You got Jace Woyda, that's a 300 hitter you're losing. But like other than that, I feel like a lot of the guys you're losing were kind of expected, and none of them this year really were huge impact guys. Like a few guys out of the bullpen, sure, but I mean, for the most part, what you're losing is not like, oh man, like you're losing like your Friday night starter or something like that. Like you just kind of expect to lose a lot of guys every year in the portal, especially after how bad this season was. And whether the things that are said out, like, like in different stories and stuff are true, who knows? I might have played a part in it, but it's not really surprising to see a lot of the guys enter the portal, and we kind of that they're going to lose a lot, but you expect them to also gain a lot of new players in return to make this kind of a different looking roster going into next season.
Yeah, I think you look at Woyda as maybe one of the bigger losses, if not the biggest loss of the portal so far. As you mentioned, 300 hitter this season, obviously did have more eligibility to be able to come back, one of the best slugging percentages on the team, good on base percentage. Like, he was a consistent hitter that really had to earn his way into the starting lineup. I think at the beginning of the season, he was using some pitch hitting situations, hit that grand slam early on in the season, really made an impact right away and got himself into the everyday lineup, and was somebody that you thought you could potentially have coming back next year to help build your offense around, but that's obviously not going to be the case now.
Yeah, that probably is the biggest loss, I would say, probably by far. Look, besides being a 300 hitter, the guy was a nice piece to have in the lineup because when Ethan Petrie went down with his injury, Jace was typically about the 4-hole hitter on this lineup, and he was actually doing some damage. So to lose a guy like that, a nice left-handed batter, his fielding is not what you have him for necessarily. Like, he's going to DH, play a little bit of first if he can, and I don't think he played much outfield this year, to be honest. And when he was in the lineup, though, he was one of the more consistent hitters. So to lose him is not ideal, but I think the guys that you got in return out of the portal before it even opened, I feel like those are your guys that are definitely going to be a suitable replacement, if not better than what Jace brought to the table, but definitely someone you would have liked to keep.
Looking at Tyler Pitzer, and look, this entire pitching staff did not perform well this year. It's well documented, worst pitching staff ERA-wise in program history, but Pitzer is somebody that did see a good amount of innings so far this year, mainly coming out of the bullpen. And I'm not saying that he's somebody that you would have been building your bullpen around or anything next year, but it is another further question of, okay, well, what are you going to do in terms of retooling this pitching staff to hopefully make next year better.
Don't let the 6.99 ERA fool you when it comes to Pitzer, because you got to remember, like, go back to that Auburn weekend, that disastrous weekend, specifically the 24-2 loss. He was charged with 10 runs in that game in like an inning of work. I think it was actually like 2/3 of an inning of work. So that inflated his ERA from 4 flat to nearly 7 in one outing. So one outing kind of derailed everything for him. That's why the numbers look as bad as they did. So before that, he was actually fine. He had a 3 ERA last year. Before Auburn, he had about a 4 ERA. So in theory, he was probably one of South Carolina's top relievers this season. That said, I don't think he's really a reliever, to be honest. Like, yes, he's closed out some games. Yes, he's pitched late innings for this team before. But keep in mind, he came here as a starter, and he was actually relatively good in a starting role last year. Like, we remember what he did against Vanderbilt in those 8 innings he pitched. I mean, he was just phenomenal. So to lose him, that's definitely the next biggest loss amongst the transfers. But again, it's someone that you can definitely go replace, because much like running backs in the NFL, I think pitchers are very replaceable, and you can go out there and find someone that maybe throws harder and has better command. I'm not sure, but you can definitely go out there and find another Tyler Pitzer out there, I would say.
Yeah, the command was the big issue for him. 28 walks, which is second on the team this season, right behind Jake McCoy. Obviously, McCoy threw a whole lot more innings as a regular starter. So, yeah, that command was kind of the issue for him. And, again, seeking more opportunity somewhere else in the transfer portal. And then he had Eddie Copper, which I guess if you were going to make a prediction of what was going to be the most obvious transfer out of anybody, Eddie Copper, given what we learned in Whittle's story a couple weeks ago about the treatment of him and the recovery, or the way the team handled his recovery as he was trying to get back on the mound, it makes sense that he's going to be going somewhere else. And look, he's somebody that when we got to see him before he got hurt as a freshman a year ago, I thought it looked really promising. He was somebody that I was excited to see get the opportunity to come back. Obviously, that didn't end up happening. Again, sounds like a lot of that responsibility may fall on the coaching staff. But if he can get back to 100%, he could be, wherever he ends up going, a solid piece for somebody.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that he was your regular midweek starter as a freshman, and he was doing great, giving you typically like 5 innings, keeping you in the game, and then he gets hurt and kind of derailed everything. And then this year was an absolute botch by the coaching staff of the way they handled things, which is just that's another story for another day, obviously. But like, I mean, you just wish the best for Eddie. You wish the best for all these guys, to be honest, because look, they all underperformed this year. If they got opportunities, Eddie did not get a chance to pitch this year, so don't count against him. But you just hope they are able to go find a place that suits best for them, and you hope they actually have schools that are interested in them, and that they don't just linger around the portal and then have to focus on something else, because they all have really good talent. It's just, I think the combination of things went wrong this season, and some of that's due with them just not performing super well, but it's not just that. There's other things that go on, and it's just unfortunate. So hopefully they're able to find an opportunity, but I think South Carolina has done a good job so far of filling the holes as they need to.
They did get a couple guys committed out of the portal over the course of the weekend as well. You have a slugger in Logan Sutter from Purdue. Somebody that was a JUCO All-American, had a very solid couple of years with Purdue these last couple of years, and somebody that comes in obviously with the hopes that he can help get this offense back on track.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I think Sutter is someone that I've seen a few of his clips now. He's got a nice, compact, right-handed swing. And I think he's someone that, he's got some good ability with that bat. He's got some pop in there. That's what Paul Maneri's looking for. And, people have asked, how does that – he's a first baseman, so how does that impact Bo Hollins and stuff? Well, I don't think that's necessarily going to be an issue because, one, he can DH. He can also play third base, and KJ Scobie's at third, but you're going to need a DH in this lineup. So it makes sense from that standpoint of if you can hit, you will find your way into the lineup. They will find a position for you, put you at DH, whatever the case might be. You'll find a way in there that way.
And then one more guy, a multi-skilled player in Cullen Horowitz out of Samford, somebody that can bat, play the field, and pitch as well, as he's done a little bit of all of that for Samford these past couple seasons.
Yeah, and look, the numbers don't really pop off the page. Like most people are saying, why is South Carolina going after this guy? Well, number one, how often do you get to find a guy that's actually a two-way player? And look, the ERA may not be great, the hitting may not be great, but South Carolina sees something that they're obviously attached to that they can go out here, build off of, and maybe see if it works. I mean, maybe this is something that they want to just find out what they can use him for, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it's not the end of the world.
So that's the early transfer portal activity for South Carolina as it officially opens today. We'll see if any more names jump into it. It's going to be open for the next month. It was a crazy weekend of regional action, including a couple favorites going down in their own ballpark. We'll dive into that coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry on your Monday here on The Game.
Everyone knows that AAA Heating and Air has the best HVAC replacement options in the Midlands with their guaranteed financing, no payments or interest for 12 months, and a 15-year parts and labor warranty. They're hard to beat when you need a new system. But did you know they also have great deals for repairs? That's right. If your system is broken and you're strapped for cash, AAA Heating and Air can help. They'll get your repairs done with payment options for up to 12 months and also no credit check required. That's right. So if you are the homeowner, all you need is a valid bank account. That's it. That's all you need. So don't wait. Call AAA Heating and Air today and get your comfort back on track. AAA Heating and Air, comfort you can trust.
Welcome back in. Extra Point. Tyler Head, Jack Beltry with you on your Monday here on the game. While South Carolina did not get to partake in the NCAA baseball tournament, if you just got to sit back and watch it this weekend, you were treated to a ton of chaos, lots of upsets, lots of surprises, and an old team in the upstate didn't make it very far either.
Yeah. In case you missed it, I know South Carolina fans definitely did not. Clemson, what happened out at Clemson this weekend? I mean, what a disaster that must have been. I mean, number one, in case you missed it, actually, in all seriousness, Clemson was eliminated yesterday from their own regional, which they hosted, had a great season, but it ended in disappointing fashion, losing 16 to 3, right? With 7 errors. 7 errors. I mean, look, watched a lot of South Carolina baseball this year. Kind of felt like watching that again this year with how Clemson played. It's like Clemson stole South Carolina's powers or something. It was just unreal, and that is a really disappointing way to go out for that team that had such high expectations and will now have a drought that has lasted 15 years now of not going to Omaha.
And after the game, of course, disappointment for Clemson. Anytime you host a regional, you're expected to get through it and make your way into a super. Eric Bakich, though, and kind of reflecting on the season, did make it a point to mention the fact that they did sweep South Carolina earlier on the season.
I'll just always remember this group as they found a way in so many close games, so many one-run games, so many tight games, and they just found a way to flex their mental toughness and come out ahead. I mean, it's just incredible, really. And early in the season, when our first goal was in front of us with the Gamecocks, that was an awesome weekend, and so they'll always have that. That'll be part of the history book with this team.
So 2 parts to this. One, I don't have a problem with him saying that because guess what? When you win the rivalry series, you have bragging rights for the next 365 or however many days until you play it again. That goes with football, baseball, basketball, softball, whatever the sport may be. So I don't have a problem with him bringing that up. But here's my thing. If I'm a Clemson fan, is that something I want to hear, 30 minutes after you just got skull-drugged by Kentucky and eliminated for your own regional? Like, I feel like there's a time and place for those kind of things to be brought up. I don't know if yesterday was that moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it was unprompted, too, is the big thing. And, look, that's probably the one thing. Like, I understand him bringing it up. Like, sure, it was totally random, but like they had a great season. They swept South Carolina. Like, sure, bring it up like that. But to make a note of it, like just unprompted, that like, hey, like we swept South Carolina this year. They'll always have that. That's such I don't know. The optics of it are just not good when you have to say something like that. And obviously, it's caused a storm on social media of South Carolina fans just like laughing at. And congrats, it was the worst South Carolina team in program history. Like most losses in a season, most SEC losses in the year. This was not a top 10 South Carolina team that got swept. Like this was a god awful team that got swept this season. So I get it from Clemson's standpoint, but it just on the whole, it's not necessarily what you want to hear right after the season ends, because it's like your focus wasn't even really on the task at hand, which was to beat Kentucky.
Well, it does highlight the fact, though, that he understands this rivalry. He understands that even at your lowest point in the year, you can pull the South Carolina card to potentially, get people off your back a little bit, which obviously when we go back and listen to like what Maneri said leading up to the Clemson series and coming away from it after they got swept, there's more baseball to play. The SEC is more important. It's like, no, but this is important to everyone. And I don't know, maybe hearing Bakich say this will readjust him a little bit. I don't know.
And then the other comment he had to say just about, like I'm just reading this off. It's just he was a little fiery talking about, Clemson hasn't been to Omaha since 2010. And he's like saying, quote, "We know, we've got it. We're doing everything in our power to fix that." It's just like I don't know, just some of the comments he makes in these post games, just I don't know. It really rubs people, I think, the wrong way. And if you're a Clemson fan, it's another year of disappointment. It feels like every year they have these high expectations, but are always falling short. And so, we talk about South Carolina's drought, getting back to Omaha being long. Clemson's is even longer, and that's it's got to be disappointing for Tiger fans.
Well, a lot of disappointment around the SEC as well. Of course, they put a record 13 teams in the NCAA tournament this year. Number 1 overall seed, Vanderbilt, hosting their regional out of Nashville, falls to Wright State yesterday by a score of 5. Put up a valiant effort in the 9th inning by putting up 3 runs, but not able to get enough to overcome things. They were down to Wright State on Friday as well. They had their starting pitcher was throwing a no-hitter, Cam Allen was, and got pulled in the 7th inning. Vanderbilt was able to come back and win that game in crazy fashion. But, I mean, Wright State had Vanderbilt's number for the vast majority of the weekend, and Louisville ends up making it out of the Nashville Regional as the winner there.
It just makes you wonder if Vanderbilt just got hot at the right time to win the SEC tournament, and then that was it for them. So I'm not sure, but they become the first number 1 overall seed to not just miss a super regional, but miss the regional final, which is insane because they lost to Louisville on Saturday in the winner's bracket round, and then they had to go play on Sunday early, and then they lose to Wright State. So they'll be Wright State and Louisville, now. But it's just crazy to think about that Vanderbilt, the number 1 overall seed, is not even playing for a chance to go to a super regional. That's a really bad look, and it was just a theme for most of the top seeds around the country.
Well, Texas as well. Of course, Jim Schlossnagle in his first year there, coming off the appearance in the national championship with rival Texas A&M. They get bounced twice in their regional by UTSA, who advances on and moves to the super regional themselves. Did I hear that Schlossnagle accidentally said Gig'em at some point this weekend as well?
It was during one of those in-game interviews, which I think are just so dumb, to be honest. But it sounded like he may have said it, but I could understand also they maybe said hook 'em, but just based off of listening as close as I can, it wouldn't be hard to believe that he said gig 'em. So very, very funny hearing that. That's not going to go over well right after Texas got bounced in their own regional.
Yeah, he's got some explaining to do, to say the least. Georgia yesterday, wild game with Oklahoma State, went about 4+ hours. Oklahoma State ends up winning with a walk-off in the bottom of the ninth, 11-9, as they end up losing to Duke later on in the day, as Duke ends up advancing out of the Athens Regional.
Good on Oklahoma State. That was a crazy game, and Duke and Chris Pollard, they've done such a great job. Like, that's probably one of the more underrated coaches in college baseball, taking that program from where it was.
We were talking about him last year, South Carolina potentially being interested in him.
Like, when he got to Duke, I don't think they'd made the tournament since like 1968. So it had been a long time coming that they were eventually going to get better, but they're one of the more consistent under the radar programs. Now, as for Georgia and Wes Johnson and stuff, I mean, look, he's done a great job there taking that program to new heights and stuff. And now they've hosted 2 regionals in 2 years there. But you gotta at some point you gotta be able to take the next step. And I think it's a disappointing finish to a rather good year for Georgia. But obviously they're very talented. They should have a chance to get back there again next year. It's just, you don't want to get into this Clemson spot of you're continuing to fall in these home regionals and stuff, and you're falling short of getting to your ultimate goal of getting to Omaha. Yeah,
Georgia's the classic case. They were the number 1 offense as far as power hitting, leads the entire nation in home runs going into the NCAA tournament, hit a ton this weekend as well. But they have the 12th best staff ERA in the SEC, and when you get into these tournaments, if you don't have pitching, it's going to catch up with you. So they're a team that definitely needs to hit the portal hard when it comes to pitching in the offseason.
No, yeah. If you don't have pitching depth, not just good pitching, but if you don't have depth, you're in a really tough spot, especially if you lose one of these first 2 games in regional play. You are basically doomed from the start.
Well, talk around baseball here at South Carolina. Obviously, the past couple weeks has revolved around Coach Manieri and his future with the program. Our guy Jordan Kay of the State Newspaper got to speak with Jeremiah Donati the other day and finally got some answers into the accusations being made against Coach Manieri and the baseball program. We'll talk to Jordan coming up next, get his insight as the X Point rolls along. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry with you on your Monday here on The Game. And welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyra Head and Jack Beltry along with you here on your Monday on the Game. We've been talking a lot of baseball so far this morning. Crazy weekend for the NCAA regionals. Of course, South Carolina not a part of that this year, as it was the worst season since the team has joined the SEC in year number 1 under Paul Maneri. And, of course, we've talked at length about what happened a couple weeks ago with John Whittle's story of the Big Spur, exposing some things behind the scenes when it comes to why this season went as wrong as it did. And we've been waiting for some kind of word from somebody, whether it be him or Jeremiah Deny, the AD, to address what was written about the program. And we finally got some of those answers. Our guy, Jordan Kay of the State newspaper, put out an article over the weekend after a conversation with Jeremiah Donati. First of all, Jordan, appreciate you taking your time as always. Are you maybe surprised at all that it took you asking the questions to finally get some answers and thoughts from Donati out of what the accusations were against the program a couple weeks ago?
I'm not too surprised. I think there probably wasn't a ton of upside to talk before then, to come out right away and say anything. So I wasn't too surprised. I figured it was one of those situations where it was better to just kind of wait it out a little bit and kind of let the process go.
Jordan, what's up, man? It's Jack. Just wanted to ask just more of a broad question here and getting the sense of talking to Jeremiah. What was the attitude you got from him? You know, kind of just how do you feel just about everything going on? Because obviously this is just a frustrating season for all involved. What did you kind of sense in terms of the mood from him talking about the baseball season?
Yeah, I think he was like, I wouldn't say like, you know, the vitriol that some of the fan base has about it, but he was not happy that, you know, the season went the way it did. The fact that, you know, he gets here in January, this first-year head coach, and they have one of the worst seasons in program history. Like, he was not excited about that at all. But I think he's kind of trying to look at it and say, okay, like, what were the factors that went into why this season was so bad? And to him, some of that went down to Paul being hired in June and not really having a head start on the transfer portal. Some of it, I think, was the pitching of the SEC, and then also kind of what he said in that story is like, Paul didn't inherit a program that was going to Omaha every year, and whoever is the one that revitalizes South Carolina baseball, like, it's probably not going to be this quick fix. This is a program that has been at the bottom of the SEC for like the last 8 to 10 years. It's going to take a little bit to get it out of that. And I think Jeremiah, coming in from the outside, kind of senses that a rebuilding South Carolina baseball is something that might take some time.
Been talking to Jordan Kay of the State newspaper about his conversation with Athletic Director Jeremiah Donati about the South Carolina baseball program. And Donati kind of echoed a lot of what we heard from Coach Maneri throughout the entire season, especially as things started to turn in the wrong direction, that talent was an issue this year, according to him. And that's something that's obviously the high priority of the offseason, making sure they get the talent that fits what Maneri is trying to do, and obviously being able to compete in the SEC as well. So they both seem to be seeing eye to eye on that point.
Yeah. I know they've had conversations and stuff, and that might be, kind of a through line that Paul has expressed, or it could just be from Jeremiah watching the team. But, I think we kind of knew this as the season was going on. Like, there is no way you can run back the team they had, especially the pitching staff. They've already gotten a couple guys in the transfer portal. But you're going to basically have to flip the entire pitching staff. You can maybe keep a couple guys, and I think that was a pretty clear thing throughout most of the season. Like, this pitching staff was not up to the task in the SEC, and now you have the arduous task of finding about like 8 or more guys in the transfer portal who are going to be able to not just participate in the SEC right away, but somehow be upper echelon SEC pitchers. Like, that's a very tough ask And so we'll see if they can pull it off.
And kind of going off that, Jordan, obviously South Carolina is going to be, playing more NIL resources this summer than they had last year, which, quite frankly, was more than they had given the previous staff. My question is to you, just hearing that.
Oh, did we lose Jack?
Do you solve the problems that they have?
Can you ask the last part of the question, Jack? I lost
you cut out there for a second. Go ahead.
Just, the NIL resources, Jeremiah bringing that up. Obviously, South Carolina's going to have more money to play with, it seems, this offseason. Do you feel like that is the solution to fixing this here? And, do you feel like there's more that they can do to kind of get this thing back on track to where they want to be?
I don't know if it's the solution, but I mean, it's a start. It's what you have to do in this day and age. You've got to put money behind your team and let your coach go out to the transfer portal and throw out competitive offers to high-level pitchers. Is that everything? No. I mean, there has to be plenty of other things that get tweaked, but it's a start. And I do think one thing when you talk about resources in this day and age is it's not always just NIL. One thing Paul pushed for and the administration kind of granted is in the past, kids hadn't been allowed to, or South Carolina hadn't paid for kids like summer school tuition. So, football players, if they enroll, if you're a freshman, you enroll in June, May actually, because a couple of the kids just enrolled. You go through all of summer workouts with the strength and conditioning staff at South Carolina. And then by the time fall ball rolls around, you've already been within the program for 2 or 3 months. Like, that's a very important part of new guys arriving on football teams. That was not the case for South Carolina baseball. These guys, because, the school didn't pay for summer school tuition for baseball players, if you were a newcomer at South Carolina, you showed up on August or whenever that fall semester started. So now they're going to pay for the summer school tuition. So these newcomers, the transfers, the freshmen, can show up in the summer, go through the strength and conditioning program. It's things like that, that a lot of people don't consider that, really I had never even thought of, that I think is some of the resources where they're trying to also help Paul.
Again, a couple more minutes here with Jordan Kay of the State newspaper. And Donati, as expected, mentioned the fans and the passion for this program. And do you think in your conversation with him, seeing all this negativity that surrounded the program this year and how bad it was, do you think he truly understands fully just how much baseball means to people here at South Carolina, given the fact that he's just coming in as a new guy back in January?
I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a tough one. I do think his mentions on Twitter, probably his conversations around lead him to know that this program and this fan base is very, very dead set and loves baseball. So I don't think it's something that's just totally passing him by. But, you do have to kind of point to the fact that since he's been here, the only time he's really seen a full stadium is like opening day when they were honoring Ray Tanner. And I think Donati threw out the first pitch. But other than that, like, he has not seen a full Founders Park or seen a LSU series in March where, 8,000 people are showing up every day. So, it's hard to know that he understands that, but I'm sure by as much talk as there has been over the last couple of weeks, as many mentions as I'm sure he's getting on Twitter, that he kind of understands that this is a big deal around here.
He's probably gotten to the point where he's turned his notifications off, I'm sure.
That probably would have been smart.
He's Jordan Kay of the State newspaper. Again, you can read his full conversation with Jeremiah Donati from over the weekend about the state of the South Carolina baseball program. Jordan, we appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you as football season gets closer.
Thanks, fellas. Have a great morning.
Absolutely. Again, Jordan Kay of the state newspaper. We'll come back, wrap up hour number 1, and discuss what we just heard from Jordan K. there in terms of the Carolina baseball program and Donati's thoughts on it. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry with you on your Monday on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. It's our Ed and Jack Beltry along with you on your Monday here on the game. In that time we were talking to Jordan Kay about what Donati said about Coach Maneri in the baseball program. We got another transfer entering the portal for South Carolina. Nolan Rocky has officially entered the portal for the Gamecocks. Another one that, Jack, you and I were talking about in this break. Yeah, probably not all that surprising, but again, kind of goes back into really resetting this entire roster, seemingly from an offensive standpoint, it looks like.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not that surprising, to be honest. Look, Nolan entering the portal, look, he's a guy that, came from Clemson, had some real potential, had some production there, but we just never really got to see what he could do this season. Had injuries, only played in 14 games, 12 starts, didn't really get a chance to do much. And he tried coming back, but, at the end of the day, he got knee surgery after the season. And you wish him well, and hopefully he can recover fully and get back to full health and find an opportunity elsewhere, because he is a good ball player when healthy.
Yeah, and again, portal opening today, going to be open for the next month, so a lot of movement in and out, and we'll see what South Carolina does there. And I thought it was interesting. The one thing that he noted on there that hasn't been the case in seasons past is the ability to bring these guys in summer, pay for their summer school, and allow them to get into the strength program and start working, with this team, as early as possible. Once they're able to commit here in the transfer portal, I mentioned guys like Sutter and Horowitz, who are imagining going to be able to do that with South Carolina. So is that going to make a difference? Well, we're going to have to see. But that seemed to be a major objective for Donati and Maneri for how they're going to handle this offseason differently.
Yeah, look, I mean, they have to handle this offseason differently. There has to be a different approach to basically everything they're doing. Because if it's not going to be, obviously the coaching staff's not going to change at all, and the players will change for the most part, but you have to change the way you went about doing things. Like more NIL money, that will definitely help in getting players in. Having their tuition paid for in the summer, that will definitely help as well, getting these guys in and getting them kind of acclimated to South Carolina sooner rather than later as school starts in August, and then you got fall ball a few weeks after that. So the sooner you can get on top of things, the better, and I like the way this is heading.
And, with the seemingly extra NIL resources, yes, this story that came out a couple weeks ago obviously paints Maneri and the baseball program in a bad light, but there's a lot of guys out there. If you make it worth their while enough, they will probably come play for just about anybody. So at least to start off with, they've been able to get a couple guys, decent guys, seemingly so far in the transfer portal. So again, it doesn't seem like the story is having too much of a negative effect in terms of bringing talent in. Obviously, a lot of guys have left so far, but in terms of bringing guys in, it doesn't seem to be a deterrent as of yet.
No, and I think that just goes back to what you said. I mean, more money gives you more opportunity to bring guys in. And look, it's hard to say no to a nice sum of money you get from a program if it's South Carolina or whoever. And so that is going to benefit them, especially after a season where they were just very disappointing. And look, it's hard to convince guys to come play for you after a season like that. But the fact that you are able to have more money to play with will definitely help in bringing the guys that you want in, regardless of how things went this past season.
Yeah, we'll see how they stack up from an entirety of the SEC standpoint when it comes to NIL, because I guess every other team in the SEC is going to be spending a lot on their roster for 2026 as well. Jack, hopefully you enjoyed your warm-up. We got 3 more hours of this coming up from noon to 3. Nope. Well,
yeah, sorry, my connection has just been awful this morning, but yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it.
We'll talk plenty of baseball then coming up as well, NBA playoffs, and also talk a lot about what Coach Beamer had to say with Jay and Elijah on the postgame show on Friday, which I'll get into coming up next to start off the 10 o'clock hour. It is the Extra Point. It's our head along with you here on your Monday on the game. Welcome back in hour number 2. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on the game. No Sam Shapiro today. Actually told me yesterday he got into a little bit of a fender bender this weekend. So he is without transportation for the moment. So hopefully everything is all good with him, and we'll work to get him back in coming up next week as we roll along through the month of June in the summertime. You know, it's funny, this obviously being the first show of June, I did the thing where, because I save the audio files for every hour here, and I save them based on whatever date it is, and I just out of habit typed 05 instead of 06 as we've now obviously transitioned into the new month, and I'll probably do that at least 3 or 4 more times this week before I finally get into the rhythm of typing out 06. It's like when you're a kid and you come back from like winter break for the new school year, and every time you have to write your date at the top of the paper, you end up writing the previous year and have to scratch it out or erase it to write the correct year, and you do that for like the first month of the school year, so you finally get into the rhythm of it. Kind of one of those things that carries over as we are adults now as well. I'll get into a little bit of what Coach Beamer had to say with Jay and Elijah on the postgame show coming up here in just a couple minutes when he joined them on Friday, but I do want to add just kind of one more little thing to our conversation with Jordan Kay of the State newspaper about 30-ish minutes ago. Of course, he had his conversation with Jeremiah Donati. There's a great article on the State newspaper detailing everything Donati had to say in reference to the baseball program in Paul Maneri on the heels of the story that John Whittle put out on the Big Spur a couple weeks ago that very much painted the South Carolina baseball program in an extremely negative light, with a lot of stories of players being mistreated, not using technology the right way, and all those kind of things that would lead to the season being as bad as it was for South Carolina. And Donati, seems to have the full support, or seems to give his full support behind Coach Maneri. I do also have to throw out there, Maneri's buyout's $5.1 million, I think, or somewhere along those lines, and it would cost around $7 million to completely clean house with the entire staff. I do think you also have to consider the possibility when it comes to the way that Donati is talking about this program, knowing they wouldn't have the ability, unless it were fired with cause, then you wouldn't have to pay the buyout, knowing they don't have the ability to just move on from Coach Maneri after a disastrous season, that may influence a little bit of why it was spun in such a positive way. That, hey, we know there's problems, but we're going to work to get him better and all those kind of things, because if you know he's going to be your coach regardless next year of how you feel about him, it would not do you well to, in your first comments about the program, saying, yeah, those things were true, but he's still got to be our coach. So, and I'm not saying this is why Donati said these kind of things, just kind of throwing it out there as another possibility that, knowing that he has to be your coach next year, you want to make it sound as good as possible. And he mentioned the NIL resources, mentioned going out there and getting better talent, all those kind of things. Now, if I don't recall him saying anything about looking into the technology resources that apparently the program did not use this past year, that probably would go a long way in helping them out in a lot of areas. But again, Donati seems full steam ahead with Coach Maneri and Monty Lee and Terry Rooney and the entire staff being back for next year. And again, it's going to be a long off season, and we'll see if they can make things better coming up in 2025. You know how many days we are away until kickoff? 90. That's right at, technically speaking, 3 months. And again, you got July and August, which are 31-day months. So it's not right on the day of the month as far as the 31st goes, like it'll be in August, but right at a even pretty much 3 months until South Carolina and Virginia Tech kick things off in Atlanta to start off the 2025 season. We have a lot of questions about this team in a variety of ways as the offseason rolls along, but one of the biggest questions that we've had, especially over the course of these last couple of weeks especially, is what is the status of Rasul Faison, and will he be eligible when the season does start? Coach Beamer was on the halftime. There I go, messing up show names again. He was on the post-game show with Jay and Elijah on Friday and was asked about the latest on the eligibility or seeking eligibility for Rasul Faison in 2025. Here's what he had to say.
No, we have not. It's unfortunate. Every time I hear through the grapevine that we should know something in the next day or two, it never happens. And what's today, Friday? I think Tuesday I heard we should know something in the next couple of days, and here we are Friday, and we've heard nothing. So nothing right now. Our players are back in town working out. I was out watching them today, work out, lift, and run. And, the team always gets together at the end, and they, break it down on something, 1-2-3 team or 1-2-3 Gamecocks or whatever it is. And today they broke it down on Free Soul as well. So they're behind him, and he's here working hard and hoping that, we get some closure on this soon.
There's your hashtag Free Soul. Rasul Faison trying to get his eligibility from the NCAA. Do you have that friend or person in your life, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a coworker, that you're like, hey, I need to know this by this time, or I need you to tell me this by this time, or whatever it may be, and they're like, yeah, I'll let you know by the end of the day, or I'll let you know tomorrow, or we'll talk about it this week, and like that never comes, and you have to keep looping back around to them over and over and over again until finally you just force something out of them. That's kind of what South Carolina is dealing with right now. It sounds like when it comes to the NCAA. Because, again, if you remember, Rasul Faison didn't think he had any eligibility left, but in the wake of the Pavia lawsuit against the NCAA, it's like, hey, there seems to be a pathway for me to get an extra year of eligibility, which is why he entered the transfer portal, which is why he ended up at South Carolina. And we all thought, okay, this shouldn't be too much of an issue, right, when it comes to submitting stuff to the NCAA and getting the likely thumbs up approval. Because here's the thing, the NCAA rarely ever denies eligibility, especially in today's day and age, because that always leads to, lawsuits. That we thought it was going to be a sure thing that Rasul Faison was going to get his eligibility granted at some point, likely in the spring. I mean, you go back to before spring practice even started. Coach Beamer is in his, weekly pressers through, the month of March or through the month of April, routinely said, yeah, we've sent him all the stuff. Hey, we should know by the end of the week. We should know very soon, feeling good, feeling more confident about it. But as spring came to an end, as we obviously transition into May, now into the month of June, you can hear the concern in his voice because he does not know if what is expected to be the number one running back on this team is going to be eligible for the 2025 season. And obviously we talk about the importance of the run game in the South Carolina offense. Last year was a remarkable season for South Carolina on the ground. That was the first time they finished in the top 5 in the SEC in ground game in over a decade, right? And in fact, the past couple of years under Coach Beamer have been particularly poor when it came to running the football. Now, yes, some of that does go back to the offensive line, but there's also a degree of not having an established, consistent running game outside of last year where you had obviously Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders carrying a bulk of the load a season ago. And obviously when you lose a guy like Rocket Sanders out of eligibility and going on to the NFL, that's a hard guy to replace. But when you look at the production that Rasul Faison had when he was at Utah State, again, it's Mountain West compared to the SEC, where Rocket Sanders was obviously at Arkansas, forced to come to South Carolina. But you like a lot of the numbers that you saw. 1,000-yard season, breaks a ton of tackles, the good build. Obviously, like you see a lot of the positives of why this guy can come in here and make an impact. There's obviously always going to be the question of, okay, how do you translate to a much tougher league on a week-in, week-out basis? But again, I think we're all excited to see it, and we're hoping for the best that Faison was going to be that kind of guy that South Carolina needed out of the backfield. And now you look at it and say, okay, well, is he even going to be able to play this year? Or is he going to be able to play halfway through the season? Because that's another thing, too. Let's go back to the Tez Walker situation at North Carolina a couple seasons ago. That obviously was a big deal because South Carolina didn't have to go against him to start the season back in 2023. Was it halfway through October? I think that he finally got granted eligibility. Now, in the wake of that, of course, Tez Walker, I believe, launched a lawsuit against the NCAA in terms of limiting his NIL. Because guess what? When you don't allow guys to play, that violates antitrust. That we thought would maybe kind of end a lot of those mid-season eligibility approvals. We know that Rasul Faison recently lawyered up and, got the representation to go after the NCAA to help assist in him getting this eligibility. But again, we're 90 days away from kickoff, and we don't know anything as of right now. And if I remember correctly, Beamer, a couple weeks ago, I think said it can be all the way up until the morning of the first game. So they can be in Atlanta, getting ready to go for that game against Virginia Tech and be given the thumbs up then, or being told, hey, nope, not today. So you don't want to have to deal with that. Again, and Beamer said he's out there working, he's practicing and all those kind of things. But you do, especially as you get closer to the start of the season, get into fall camp and all those kind of things, you have to start thinking about it from a logistical standpoint. So, okay, well, we think Rasul's going to be our number one running back, but if he's not, does that mean we need to give more reps to Oscar Attaway or Jawarn Howell or Matthew Fuller or whatever it may be? Because you got to have your plan B, right? And if Faison's not going to be able to play, it seems like Oscar Attaway is going to be that now lead back. How much of the load does he carry? We don't know. How much do you mix in the other two guys? We don't know that as well. So that's something that we're not to the point of hitting the panic button because, again, you still have 3 months. But the fact that nothing's been said or done up to this point really leaves you scratching your head. Because, again, they could, while I'm talking right now, the NCAA could say, yeah, okay, he's good. Or, again, we could be sitting there on game morning against Virginia Tech wondering who's going to be the running back to start the game for South Carolina. You just truly, don't know. So that's going to be something that we're going to continue to monitor as the entire offseason goes along, and hopefully it works out in the favor of South Carolina, because if not, again, you have 3 primary scholarship running backs. And, most programs kind of go with the back by committee type of approach. So it isn't always just one guy carrying the bulk of the load. And I don't know that I think Rocket Sanders had maybe 70-ish% of the load when it came to running back totes a season ago, maybe 75 or 80%, some a little bit higher than that. But, maybe Rasul Faison wasn't going to be a guy to carry that kind of load for South Carolina, but it can certainly be one of those things where, he was going to be the established back, the guy that got a bulk of the carries, maybe like 60% or something along those lines. And if you're game planning around that being a part of your offense this year and suddenly you don't have it, how does that change things? How does that change what you call in what situations? How does that change how do you utilize guys out of the backfield? We don't know. And again, I'm throwing out hypothetical scenarios here because I hope that South Carolina doesn't have to get to this point. But when you're Mike Shula, when you're Sean Elliott, being the run game coordinator, these are things you're having to think of and having to plan for in the worst case scenario that Rasul Faison doesn't get eligibility for the first game and potentially the entire season if it ends up getting dragged out that far when it comes to the NCAA. Again, we thought this was going to be something that was going to be kind of over and shut with as the course of spring football rolled along, but here we are in the first couple days of June, and we still don't know what's happening with Rasul Faison and his eligibility for South Carolina. So again, going to continue to keep an ear out for that and see what ends up happening there. Coach Beamer also talking about the value of non-conference scheduling with Jay and Elijah on Friday. We'll dive into that coming up next as the Extra Point rolls along. Tyler Head, along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in, Extra Point. Tyler Head with you here in the 10 o'clock hour on your Monday as we navigate the long summer. Again, 90 days away from kickoff with South Carolina and Virginia Tech. Cool matchup. Again, I've said many times I would much rather this game be in either Columbia or Blacksburg, so the Virginia Tech faithful could experience the great traditions of Williams-Rice Stadium, where the South Carolina folks could go up there and witness all the cool things like Inner Salmon up in Blacksburg. But alas, we continue to these Week 1 neutral site games, and they don't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. But still, Carolina gets to play a Power 4 opponent in a standalone game, essentially. 3 o'clock kick on ESPN on that Sunday will be the lead-in to Miami and Notre Dame that night. So for the opening weekend of college football, you get the spotlight to yourself for about 3.5 hours, which is pretty neat in a matchup that South Carolina is heavily favored in, about 9.5, 10 points as of right now. Those lines will adjust as the offseason rolls along, but based on what we know about Virginia Tech and what we know about South Carolina, I think the vast majority of people can feel pretty good about South Carolina going into that matchup coming up on August the 31st. Of course, last week being the SEC meetings down there in Destin, Coach Beamer and all the coaches in the SEC had a lot of hot-button issues they were talking about, one of them being scheduling. And Coach Beamer, talked a lot on Friday about the value of these non-conference power opponents aside from just making your playoff resume look a little bit better.
Yeah, no, I love that, and fans love that, and I love that. I think it makes the summers. There's even more urgency in the summertime, if you will, when you open up with a non-conference opponent that you're for. Us, for example, this year, the only game on Sunday afternoon on national television is going to be awesome, and it certainly increases the urgency in the summertime, and it's exciting. Competition's a core value of this program, and we want to compete against the best week in, week out, and certainly that's an aspect of it. My dad used to say it all the time. I mean, he had openers during his time at Virginia Tech where they opened up with Reggie Bush and Southern Cal one year up in the Redskins Stadium. They opened up with Boise State one year. Georgia Tech was in a season opener one year. He had a lot of those. Alabama, I think, twice. So he had a lot of those marquee matchups in opening games, and he used to say the same thing, just the excitement that it makes for the summertime as well. So that's one aspect of it. And then certainly with the playoffs, you want to play a challenging schedule. Strength of schedule should be a component of what the committee's looking for. I don't know how much it was last year in the playoff selections, but it should be a major criteria of the selection committee when it comes to what teams get into the playoff. And when you can challenge yourself with a schedule where you play marquee games like that out of conference, it should do nothing but help you if you win them. And if you're not successful, it's a good barometer on where you are as a program and kind of where you stand.
And that last part is the one that isn't, I wouldn't say the most important, but one that really sticks out to me as you get closer to the start of the season. We talked last year about the Old Dominion game. Now, yes, that game ended up being a whole lot closer than people thought it was going to be for South Carolina, and there was a lot of worry coming away from that game. But I don't think you went into that game thinking, man, I'm going to learn a lot about this team in week number 1 taking on Old Dominion, where if you take on a Virginia Tech team, yes, they're not the best program by any means in the SEC, but they're still a Power 4 school. And if you go out there and you beat them by 35 points, you're feeling pretty darn good because you're saying, okay, that's still a school with high-caliber athletes that went out there and handled our business against. If you go out there and play a tight game or to lose that game, saying, okay, got some work to do. So it helps kind of answer some of those questions early on in the season that you want to know before you get into conference play. Because, again, last year in the Old Dominion game, we came away from that thinking, man, is South Carolina going to get above 3 wins this year? That looked awful. And then you go out there and obviously dominate Kentucky the following week, which is what kind of reset people's expectations for what the South Carolina team was obviously going to be as the season went along. So being able to have something like that in week number 1 obviously goes a long way in terms of figuring out what your team is that early on in the season. And like Beamer said as well, it helps your playoff resume in terms of if you win the game, that's obviously a point for you. Now, again, depending on where that program stands, the other program that is, it varies on how much that's going to help you in terms of your strength of schedule and quality wins and all those kind of things. Because right now, Virginia Tech under Brent Pry's not exactly in a good place. So winning that game, may not be worth a whole lot at the end of the season. But again, you're making an effort. You're trying, right? And as Beamer alluded to, just kind of going through the schedule all the way through 2031, they are going to play at least one other Power 4 opponent in the non-conference. Funny enough, all these teams from the ACC, they'll have a home game against Miami in 2026. They'll go to Miami in 2027. Home versus North Carolina in 2028. At North Carolina in 2029. NC State in Columbia in 2030. And then on the road in Raleigh for NC State in 2031. Of course, they're going to play Clemson as well in each and every one of those seasons. So South Carolina right now, and assuming if the SEC schedule does not change, South Carolina is looking at playing 10 Power 4 opponents each and every season through 2031. If the schedule does change and South Carolina is playing a ninth conference game, then they're looking at playing 11 Power 4 opponents over the course of the next 6-ish years. And that's something that not a lot of programs around the country can say. And that's something that, going back to a point that Coach Beamer made talking to CBS last week out there in Destin, where the conversation of, okay, is the SEC going to go to a ninth game eventually and make the schedule that much tougher for the SEC? Beamer talked about being in support of that as long as it's balanced across the board, right? For those that don't know, the SEC does have a rule in place where you have to play at least one Power 4 opponent, formerly Power 5, now a Power 4 opponent, outside of your conference slate every single year. Now, for schools like South Carolina and Georgia and Florida, they already have that built in by playing an ACC school in their annual rivalry matchup on rivalry week and last week of the regular season in November. But not every school has that. So, that's forcing the Kentuckys. That's Kentucky also plays Louisville, so that checks the box for them. But that forces the schools like Auburn, who's playing Baylor this year. That forces, the Mississippi States of the world and teams like that to look outside the box in terms of checking that box when it comes to a Power 4 opponent. But again, Beamer would be in support of a ninth game, but he's got to make sure it's fair across the board. Because again, while South Carolina's going out there and potentially playing 10 and maybe 11 Power 4 opponents, Kentucky's going out there checking their box against Louisville and then playing, Akron and the Little Sisters of the Poor to satisfy those other needs to make sure they can get themselves to bowl eligibility. So that's something that, again, you'd have to change a rule to kind of lay your foot down if you're Greg Sankey as the commissioner and say, look, we're going to play 9 conference games and everybody has to play one Power 4 opponent or 2 Power 4 opponents to make sure it's even across the board. Because, again, what's the incentive, especially with an expanded conference schedule where you're opening yourself up to an additional loss? What's the incentive for South Carolina to go out there and play Miami, to play NC State, play North Carolina, if they know that's only going to risk hurting their resume more than potentially helping it? Because, again, you play more games in the SEC. Again, it's all talking points and conversations as of right now, but as we navigate through the offseason, and I believe Sankey said the deadline to decide on the future of the 12-team playoff future of the playoff format was going to be coming up on December 1st. The SEC has to decide if they're going to stay at 8 games or go to 9 games, because that's a big pivot point in terms of what exactly the format's going to look like, what the Big Ten's going to approve, what the other conferences are going to be okay with, and all those kind of things. So, again, I get where Beamer's coming from. We're happy to do it as long as everybody else in the conference is okay with doing it as well, because you don't want to put yourself in a position for making your schedule so tough that it ends up hurting you on the back end, as opposed to teams go out there and schedule a little bit lighter in their other non-conference games and benefit from having a quote-unquote extra win as opposed to taking a quality loss or something along those lines. Again, it's convoluted that we have to figure out things this way to determine who ends up playing for the national championship tournament, but that's where college sports are now, and I guess we've all come to accept it at this point. Obviously, busy weekend once again when it came to baseball for NCAA regionals. A lot of movement in the transfer portal for South Carolina as well. Again, Nolan Naraki jumping in the portal a little under an hour ago, but also we finally figured out who's going to be playing in the NBA Finals coming up later on this week. We'll dive into that coming up next with Who Sprung a Leak, brought to you by our friends at over at American Leak Detection, as the Extra Point rolls along. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday on the Game.
from distance. It's been a quarter of a century since Indiana has gone to the finals. But for the first time in 25 years, they are going to the NBA Finals.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyra Head along with you on your Monday here on the game. It is time for Who Sprung a Leak, brought to you by our friends over at American Leak Detection. That was the call on Saturday night on TNT as the Pacers punched their ticket to the NBA Finals, taking on the Oklahoma City Thunder coming up later on this week. Obviously, the Knicks had one game at number 5 to make the series 3-2 and push to game number 6, and they were doing a really good job of hanging in there with Indianapolis, only down by 4 points, if I remember correctly, at halftime. But that third quarter is when the Knicks sprung their leak, so to speak, and let the Pacers get away from them to the tune of the final score of that game, where the Pacers end up winning and moving on to the NBA Finals. That was a third quarter that allowed the Pacers to go on 2 9-0 runs, one at the very beginning, one towards the middle to end of that quarter, and the Knicks were not able to overcome that gap from there, as they will pack up and go back home with all their celebrities in tow back to New York as they look to regroup this offseason and figure out how they can get a little bit further and get themselves back to the NBA Finals. Pascal Siakam ends up winning the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. His number's just slightly better than Tyrese Halliburton's there for the Indiana Pacers as they move into the finals, where OKC, to no surprise, is the heavy favorites to win it all when that gets rolling coming up a little bit later on this week. It's going to be one of those series that is interesting from a viewership standpoint. Look, the NBA is very much a star-driven league, one where brand names matter a lot. And when you look at, the year-to-year ratings when it comes to the NBA Finals, when you don't have as big a brand in the finals on either side, you can see some kind of dips in those numbers. I go back to the Bucks and the Suns playing back in 2021. That was one of the lower-rated finals ever compared to, when like Golden State and Boston played a year later, and you had an uptick in viewership there. And again, that's kind of where the NBA is as of right now, where it really boils down to who's playing in the finals and how much people want to watch. I do think you have some obviously young stars that are emerging to kind of be some of the faces of this next wave of great players in the NBA with SGA, with Tyrese Halliburton and guys like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how much people do want to tune in and watch what goes down in the NBA Finals as they get rolling a little bit later on this week. But that's Who Sprung Leak, brought to you by our friends over at American Leak Detection. We'll get back into the football and baseball conversation as well. Ray on the Love Chevrolet phone line wants to weigh in on what we've talked about so far this morning. Ray, appreciate your call as always. What's on your mind?
Hey, Tyler. Yeah, I mean, just want to cut, a couple things, related to Gamecock sports. On the scheduling thing, the one thing I agree with, I don't like to see us play these lower level schools, and I'm not going to name their names because they're outstanding institutions. I don't think it's upon us to financially benefit them. I know it's a win, but I don't like those. I think there's other teams you can play. But on the other hand, I think we have something uniquely different than every other school in the SEC. Every other school in the SEC, most schools, their big rivalry game is against somebody that's within the conference. So it's a conference game. Our biggest rivalry is Clemson. Now, I doubt anybody in the conference, year in and year out, plays a team, like Clemson. So that's kind of like a ninth conference game. But so I guess, we can't really schedule to get in a bowl game the way some other teams can. And I'm not going to name the respective schools in the conference, but that's a big thing. If you play at Clemson every year, that that makes it a little tough. But I do agree. I would like to see a schedule, division conference schools other than the state schools like we do. I agree with. And on Donati, he indicated in that article to the state that it had nothing to do with money, which, I don't, but as far as keeping, Maneri, they had nothing to do with money, which I don't know if that's true or not, but I'll take him at his word. But the way I look at it, because the way the baseball team, the way it went this year, it wasn't like we won a bunch of games and then something happened at the end and we just lost a bunch of games. We just were never in the game when it came to the conference play. So I think Maneri is now all on him. I think Tanner, hired Maneri and we wanted the best to happen. Who knows? He may prove me wrong, and I hope he does, but I just don't see it happening. But I think Maneri's now definitely Donati's guy, and we'll see what happens. But that's just my 2 cents, brother. Thanks for letting me put it in.
Absolutely. Appreciate the call as always. Again, 803-404-6100, and kind of addressing things that he was talking about there, and we have this conversation a lot when it comes to the scheduling of, football, where I think we all understand the reason for the, quote, bye games, where you play a Furman or in this year South Carolina State or something along those lines, because the check that you cut to those schools does go a long way in helping fund their own programs. And go back to Joe Moorhead last year with Akron, having the quote coming into the game against South Carolina saying, yeah, we're going to go in there, we're going to get some new saddles for the equestrian team and all those kind of things. Like, there is a purpose and a back and forth relationship between power institutions and those schools to help them out. Hey, come here, we'll beat you by 50 points, we'll give you some money, and you can go on your way. And I don't think those games are ever going to go away. But going back to what Coach Beamer said last week in reference to balancing the schedule, and Ray, I know you don't want to bring up teams specifically, but I'll point my finger strongly at Kentucky, because they're a team that routinely goes out there and allows the Louisville game to check their box in terms of a non-conference power opponent, because they play them every single year at the end of the season in their rivalry game, and then they don't make any other effort really to play tough out of conference competition. Let me read you off, outside of Louisville, the non-conference games that Kentucky has going through the 2029 season. Toledo, Eastern Michigan, Tennessee Tech, Youngstown State, South Alabama, Toledo, Murray State, Ball State, Toledo, Kent State, Eastern Illinois, and Georgia Southern. Now, again, go back to South Carolina, and not including Clemson, Miami, twice. North Carolina State, twice. North Carolina, twice. Obviously playing Virginia Tech this upcoming season. Like, there's a bigger effort being made by South Carolina to schedule tougher as opposed to Kentucky. And that's something that, again, and look, I get Mark Stoops' game, right, where he's somebody that is at a school that is not primarily focused on football. And as long as you can stay above 500, get yourself to bowl games, and maybe pop and have the occasional 9-win or so season every now and then, you're going to stay for a long time. And he's done that. He's the longest tenured coach in the SEC, believe it or not. It is in like top 10 of total coaches paid, despite not accomplishing a whole lot. But he's doing what Kentucky kind of expects of him. If you suddenly said, okay, well, instead of playing Toledo and Tennessee Tech and Kent State, now you're going to have to go out there and play Ohio State. You're going to have to go out there and play Southern Cal. You're going to have to go out there and play Texas Tech or something along those lines. You are hindering that school's ability to get to a bowl game based on what there historically are in terms of overall win and loss record. So, again, that's something that Coach Beamer says we have to straighten out. Everybody's on the same page. Like, okay, I get it. South Carolina, Kentucky, Georgia, and Florida, you already got a built-in game against a Power 4 opponent, within conference or within your, rivalry schedule. But you still got to go out there and try and schedule better outside of that as well. So, again, do you set the standard by saying, okay, everybody, if we go to a 9th conference game, you have to play a minimum of 11 Power 4 opponents or 10 to then open up the possibility of saying, okay, well, if you don't want to play another one outside of Clemson or outside of Kentucky, you don't have to, because you do have that extra conference game. Again, these are all hypotheticals right now, but it's real conversations that the coaches, the athletic directors, and the conferences are obviously having with each other in terms of determining what the future of the SEC and scheduling and playoff formats and all that kind of stuff is. And look, again, I agree with Coach Beamer. You don't want to be doing something yourself where you're making it a harder path for you, while there are other teams in the conference that are making it more of a cakewalk for themselves, because there's nothing in place that says they have to make their schedule harder than it already is. So, again, something we'll obviously see. And, again, going back to what Ray said there about Jeremiah Donati when it comes to the article with the state newspaper, and he did say it wasn't about money and all those kind of things, and that may be true, that may not be true. Again, I think if you're in a situation where the coach is going to come back next year regardless, then you're going to want to paint the program in the best and most positive light possible, because the notion of the program is not very high right now, not very positive right now. And if you can instill some hope in people by saying, hey, guess what? We're going to give them more NIL resources. We're going to go out there and we're going to bring these guys in earlier in the summer where they can get in the strength and conditioning program and work with these coaches a lot earlier than they have been in years past. That is a way of showing the fan base that you're trying. Now, again, whether the fan base wants to believe you or not and has hope as the next season rolls along, that's a different kind of story. But if you're in a position where you know you're not making the move on your coaching staff, those are the things that you're going to say. Again, Jeremiah Denies is professional at this. It's not his first rodeo. He's worked in the sports agent world. He's obviously been an athletic director prior at TCU, so he knows what he's doing, and he needs to get a positive message out about this baseball program because there hasn't been much positive to be about since the year started, and I think he kind of hit all those high points in that article. Now, again, it's up to you whether you believe him or not, and it's up to you whether you want to give your money to this program or not based on what he said, and I'm not going to tell you to go one way or the other, but I do think that's the way they kind of have a look at it, that he's in a position where obviously he's going to want to make things as good as possible, and obviously working to make that happen, but also giving the implication that it's trending in the right direction. And that's a lot of what I gather from the article with Jordan Kay from the state newspaper. We'll come back and we'll wrap up the hour 2 of the Extra Point, a beloved show for the NBA coming to an end in its current iteration. We'll dive into that coming up next. It is the Extra Point. It's our head along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Extra Points out ahead with you, wrapping up hour number 2. Talked a few minutes ago about the Pacers winning game number 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Punch their ticket to the NBA Finals, taking on the Thunder a little bit later on this week. I think there's a small, maybe not even a small, large portion of people that were maybe hoping for a Game 7, not just for the excitement of being able to see more basketball in a do-or-die scenario for both teams, but also to get at least one more day of the NBA on TNT, which, with the end of the Eastern Conference Finals, officially wrapped up a 5+ year run with the NBA on the Turner Network. And on Saturday night, following game number 6, Ernie Johnson gave the NBA on TNT's final sign-off.
We look forward. The four of us, as you've already heard, the four of us are going to be together. Our production crew is going to be together. It's going to be that same bunch. We're still going to be shooting that show in Atlanta. It's just going to air somewhere else. And so the craziness that you've seen, the nonsense and the foolishness and the top-notch basketball analysis, all of that stuff's going to be on. It's going to be on ESPN or ABC next year, not on TNT. For that, it's we're sad. But I'm proud to say for the last time, thanks for watching us. It's the NBA on TNT.
Before we go, guys, let's do the mic drop.
Obviously something we knew was coming when TNT did not re-up their contract with the NBA, but sad to see it go. And, you know, College Game Day is the only other, at least modern show that I can think of that has the same kind of connection with the audience that the NBA on TNT has. And people ask the question of, well, why do people love that so much? And it's not just the characters and personalities with Chuck and Shaq and all that kind of stuff. It's a show that you can watch, whether you're an NBA fan or not, where you don't feel like your intelligence is being insulted. You know what I mean? They have fun, but they also do a really good job of breaking down what's happening in the game you're watching or across the league and all those kind of things. And you heard Ernie Johnson mention it there. You know, they're going to ESPN. They're going to stay together, and it's going to be the same type of show, quote unquote. But there's this worry that the ESPNification of this may lead them to having the LeBron and Jordan debates on the daily, like you seem to see on First Take and all those kind of things. And I thought it was really funny prior to that final send-off, because, again, they're not going to be on the network anymore. They don't have to worry about paying the fines, I guess. Both Shaq and Charles Barkley basically said, hey, last show, we're not going to ESPN to blank around, and you obviously know what the blank means there, making a point like, hey, we're not going to stoop down to this level that people don't like. You know what I mean? This is seen as the highest caliber show when it comes to covering the NBA, and I really hope it can be the same thing as it goes to ESPN, ABC, or whatever iteration that's going to be, because obviously that group together is so magical, and it's been a long, great run for them on TNT, and obviously the way that the network presents the games is a little bit different, which is always neat to see compared to ESPN, but I'm glad they're staying together, and again, hopefully that show, as it moves, will still be as good as it's ever been, but definitely the end of an era when it comes to the NBA on TNT, ending with Game 6 on Saturday out there in Indianapolis. That'll do it for the Extra Point. Coming up next is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Wes will jump in here. We'll dive back into what's the latest with Rasul Faison, as well as a very big and very important recruiting weekend here in Columbia for South Carolina. This has been the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head currently alone in the Herndon Chevrolet Studios. Chris going to be out this week. We already knew about that. Wes did inform me. Caught in a little bit of traffic. So hopefully he'll be in here in just a moment as we can dive into all things going on with Gamecock football. Very busy weekend. I know as we get into June, it's 90 days away from kickoff. Don't worry, I do have a trivia question for Wes when he does get in here. A very big weekend from a recruiting standpoint as well. And if you've been following along at Gamecock Central, a lot of good things to get into over the weekend in terms of what happened with Coach Beamer and his staff in terms of hosting recruits and everything as we go through the summer and try and land some future members of the Gamecock football program. So again, we'll get into some of that as the hour goes along. Also, Rasul Faison, the latest on his eligibility, as Beamer talked about on Friday with Jay and Elijah on the post-game show. And right now, still very much a question up in the air, which we'll get to in just a moment as Wes makes his way into the studio. And see, the cool thing with Chris being out this week is Wes has the ability to really make a dent in this trivia thing, because despite Chris not being here, I'm still going to give you trivia questions, and you're going to be unopposed. You can get these right, and I will give you the points because I make up the rules.
Wow. Okay. First of all, what's up, Tyler?
How's it going? How's traffic?
It's okay.
Yeah.
Let me just say, so for everybody else in the sports world, all the activity has slowed.
Yes.
For recruiting dudes, June is like hyperdrive.
Yep.
Basically. So, going to be about a busy 4 weeks or so.
Yeah.
But I do look forward to probably not taking advantage of my opportunity by missing these questions and not getting an advantage on Chris. So if you could throw me a bone since I'm here and he's not,
okay,
maybe make one or two of them a little bit easier.
Okay.
That would go a long way.
See, today's question is one of those things. When you were in high school, did you ever have the teacher or whatever? It's like, hey, if you did the reading, you should be able to get this right. If you just skimmed the Wikipedia page for this 1990 South Carolina team, I feel like you can get this question right.
Okay, that's a good hint.
All right.
A good hint. That's like when the teacher had put the answers in like the first 2 pages, or like the answer was in the first couple of pages. It's like if you even slightly attempted to do your homework, you were good.
I'm trying to help you out here.
Were you a homework guy, Tyler? Were you a good student?
I was pretty good. I was one of those people that I didn't have to study egregiously because I was just kind of like, I know what I know, and that usually got me by pretty well. I had to tick that up a little bit once I got to college, but I did what I was supposed to do, I would say.
Yeah, same. That's a dangerous place to be though, because you kind of got, at least I got kind of just very comfortable, kind of doing a little bit of studying, and then when it finally catches up to you, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
I don't know how to study.
There's one college class that'll smack you in the face. Then you have to readjust yourself a little bit after that. But we'll see how well you studied for this one. So 90 days to kickoff. Go back to the 1990 season for South Carolina. Clemson was not the final game of the 1990 regular season. What future Big 12 team did South Carolina play in the final week?
Oh, my gosh.
This was a thing for a while. It wasn't always Clemson in the last game. That kind of bounced back and forth a little bit.
First of all, I did not know that.
Yes. There's a couple seasons in there where Clemson's not the last game.
So I'm going to give everybody complete transparency. I am looking at a list of Big 12 schools just so I can look at my options. I'm not going to the 1990 Wikipedia page. I'm going to try to answer or most of the time miss every answer without looking any of these up throughout your game you have going here.
All right. I appreciate the honesty.
Can you repeat the question one more time for those at home?
So in 1990, the last game of the regular season was not against Clemson. What team did South Carolina play in the final week that is now a Big 12 school?
Were they a Big 12 school at the time?
They were not. They were also an independent, much like South Carolina was. Now, there's a lot of independents back in 1990.
Yeah, I don't even know if that. I don't know if that helps me. I don't remember the landscape, but was it in Columbia?
It was in Columbia. They had lost to Clemson the prior. Is this a Thursday game? They played 5 days later, so I think they play on Thanksgiving. They might have played on Thanksgiving actually.
This game?
This game of this team that I'm talking about, I think. Let me go back and look at 1990 on the calendar because I think they might have actually played on Thanksgiving.
Okay. Don't remember this at all. I'm gonna go UCF.
It's not UCF. It was West Virginia.
Wow.
So they played West Virginia on November 22nd. I think that would have been Thanksgiving that year because it was the next to last Thursday of 1990 in November, excuse me. And yeah, I don't know what the reasoning is behind that, but they played Clemson on the 17th, played West Virginia on the 22nd. And that was the final game of the regular season. They did win. That was their 6th win of the year. They were bowl eligible because of the steroid thing from the 1980s. They did not go to a bowl game.
Okay.
So they went 6-5.
That was a good question though.
Yeah, I'm trying to help you out.
Yeah.
And if anybody knows why they played West Virginia in the last week of the season, hit us up 803-404-6100. So
we're still just over here, man.
Yeah.
I feel like we're very much out of our element in these early 90s games.
Listen,
so.
hey, look, I'm learning too.
Yeah,
You know what
I mean
So,
that's hopefully people out there
neat trivia
getting some interesting things out. And kind of fitting that you mentioned West Virginia this weekend as well. No reason at all, but just fitting West Virginia. Are South Carolina fans, let me ask you this.
Yep.
Do you think that rival fans are allowed to talk junk in a situation such as this, where you had a terrible season if you're South Carolina?
Yep.
But then Clemson choked. But Clemson did go further than South Carolina, obviously.
I feel like when you don't win the matchup with them in the season, it's hard to, right? Like, let's go back to basketball. Basketball did not have a good season. Basketball still beat Clemson in overtime here in Columbia in the non-conference slate. So no matter how deep Clemson was going to go in the tournament, whether South Carolina made it or not, you always have that bragging right over them. I feel like, though, if you lose the matchup in season, you don't have much of a leg to stand on in terms of trying to, you can root against them, obviously, but in terms of trying to get one over on them once the season's over, I don't think you have that necessarily.
Yeah, well, you lost the in-season matchup, and then obviously South Carolina didn't make the postseason. Clemson did, so I feel like that's two things. But what you also kind of learn, and on the reverse, like there were Clemson fans talking junk about South Carolina men's basketball this past season, even though South Carolina did win that game. So I feel like it's not really all that rational because it's fanhood and rivalry and stuff like that. You're gonna find a way to talk smack. You know what I'm saying? And then if you ultimately, you always have, no matter what's happening right now, South Carolina will have their trump cards of, oh, well, let me hold up the 2 national titles. And then in football, Clemson has their trump. Let me hold up the natty and that in. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I thought it was funny. I do think it gives you a little bit more leeway for Clemson to lose the way they did at home in their regional, and then just to get blown out, just play very poorly yesterday. But 7
errors.
That's hard to do, man.
That is hard to do.
That's hard to do.
As rough as South Carolina's season was, what was the most errors they had in a game? Maybe 3 or 4? Nowhere near 7.
There was never 7. So, and to do it in that moment, I mean, it's kind of one of those things. You see that sometimes, at lower levels, obviously, where it just snowballs on the team, and it can be a little bit. One guy makes an error, it gets contagious a little bit, but 7. The game before, the Saturday game, it was very entertaining.
The one against West Virginia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one was just, I didn't even get to watch. I was tracking. It was a complete blowout, obviously.
Yeah, wild weekend across the board. Vanderbilt gets eliminated as #1 overall seed. Texas loses their regional. Georgia gets walked off against Oklahoma State yesterday. Like, the SEC put 13 teams in, which was a record, but some of the heavy hitters, the more dangerous teams, didn't make it to the Super.
And several of those teams are going to have to win today, right? Like,
there's a couple of them. Oklahoma.
Tennessee got beat yesterday.
Yep.
LSU got beat yesterday. Did you see how the Tennessee game ended? Walk.
Yeah.
Bases loaded.
Yeah, I did.
All I do feel like, bases loaded, winning run at third. You are the road team in this case, and it's a 3-0 count. Might be one of the hardest spots to be in sports.
Without a doubt. So,
like, you have to throw a strike, and everybody knows you have to throw a strike.
Oklahoma will play North Carolina, Murray State and Ole Miss, Wake Forest and Tennessee, then LSU and Little Rock. All those regional finals. Of course, winners advancing on to the Supers there. So, busy day, busy weekend for the SEC. But I don't know. I see this debate going back and forth. Like, the first weekend of the NCAA baseball tournament, it's right there sometimes with, like, the opening round of the NCAA men's basketball tournament, right? With, like, chaos, and obviously baseball is a game where that talent gap's a whole lot shorter than some of the other sports, and you can get crazy upsets. Wright State was no-hitting Vanderbilt through 6 innings on Friday, and they beat them yesterday to eliminate them. Like, you just see some crazy stuff.
Yeah, you ever look at, like, the StatCast stuff in MLB? You ever dive into that stuff? And it'll tell you also the other thing about baseball. It'll be like, if this exact these exact hits happen, however many times, this team had this percentage chance of winning. And then, you can look in a game, and the team that lost, it'll be like, if this exact game happened and they hit the ball this hard this many times, they would have won 80% of the time. But they lost this game.
Yeah.
So I feel like baseball, like, you can just have a game where a team that's infinitely more talented, too, maybe every hard hit ball they hit is right at somebody.
Sure.
And then the thing about baseball, obviously, is different in that, in football, you don't have to rotate the quarterback. In baseball, you're rotating the guy who's touching the ball every single game, right? Yep. And then within the game, you're rotating too. So I feel like even these smaller schools, a lot of them have a dude or two that they can turn to and can really maybe give a bigger opponent trouble. So I think that's why you see in these regional setups, like, hey, you run into a buzzsaw, a team maybe has a couple balls drop, and boom, you have an upset. I do want to give a shout-out to Coastal Carolina as well.
Yep.
Being an in-state school, man, I watched their game. They had several of their games. They had a great atmosphere down there. Shout out Matt Williams, who was here as a pitching coach. Shout out Chance Miller, who was here in administration, AD there now. Great, just regional win for them. And, man, Coastal's got some pitching, dude. You want to talk about rolling some arms out there? That was very impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Also some controversy down there with Coach O'Sullivan at Florida being very upset about the time of the game being moved. And there was the video going around of him cursing out, I think, the grounds crew, the associate AD. So bad luck all around for Florida as they get to bounce down there in the Conway Regional.
Yeah, and the Coastal coach basically told him where he could go in the press conference, which you got to respect.
Sure.
And I saw Chance Miller quote tweeted the video of it and was like, basically, I stand by my coach.
Yeah,
so
pretty much.
But, man, you got golly, those grounds crew people, they work incredibly hard to make sure a game can take place. So the lack of respect, it is pretty unacceptable, I think, from Sully.
Yeah, definitely so. So wild weekend of baseball. Again, the wrap-up of regional action coming on later on today, and then we'll see what the Supers look like heading into the weekend. Well, as Coach Beamer had to say to Jay and Elijah on Friday on the postgame show, including the latest on Rasul Faison. That's coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
I really haven't. The NCAA reached out. We've given them everything that they've asked for since January. They reached back out about 2 weeks ago, I think, and asked for just a little bit more information on, a couple situations with previous schools that we provided to them. We've reached out to his previous stops and gotten all the information and documentation and statements that we need from them. So we've given the NCAA everything. We haven't gotten a response on or any other feedback on why we don't have a final statement yet. No.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Wes with you on your Monday here on the game. That was Coach Beamer on the postgame show with Jay and Elijah on Friday. Asked the question that we've all been wondering for the past really couple months now, the latest on Rasul Faison and his eligibility attempts with the NCAA, and you heard it from Beamer there. Still don't really know what's going on. They've sent in everything that's been asked of them, and now we play the waiting game as, again, we're only 90 days away from the season starting against Virginia Tech, not knowing if he's going to be able to play it or not.
Yeah, waiting. That's what Miles Studi sat there and said it was like for him too. Sit around and wait, and here we are. There was a little bit of buzz last week, and Beamer actually alluded to it there. There's a little bit of buzz that this thing was going to come to an end last week, and that's something we were kind of tracking and anticipating possibly happening. And then here we sit. We're into June, and no answer. And I tell you what, man, it's kind of one of those things like you're kind of going, well, hey, they need to give him an answer, but there's still time. And then another week goes by, eventually, like you have under 3 months now, until kickoff. And you also, frankly, it's got to be in the next 2 months in order to have, no disruption on what you're trying to do as a team. He's still working out with the guys, as Beamer said.
Sure.
He's still doing everything to prepare to play right now. So it's an annoyance. It's a mental drain, I'm sure. If they give him the good news this week, then it will just be looked back on as a major annoyance, but everything will be fine. If you start getting into preseason ball and he still hasn't been cleared, then that's where you start to really maybe have a problem.
Well, and I believe Beamer said it could go all the way up until the morning of the first game to get the thumbs up or the thumbs down or just still not hear anything and maybe get approved as the season goes along. But like you said, when you get to fall camp and you're saying, okay, well, we think he's going to be our number one guy, but do we need to get more reps for Oscar Attaway or Jawan Howell or Matthew Fuller or something like that to kind of figure out what plan B is going to be in case the eligibility doesn't come? That's where these things kind of get tricky. And again, we kind of thought this was going to be something that wasn't going to take all that long because, you look at every other eligibility case, pretty much everybody else gets approved, but for whatever reason, this one's been hung up. And again, they keep telling you, hey, it's coming soon. And like the friend that you always say, hey, let me know by the end of the week, that gets back to you a month later. Like, it's kind of one of those situations where you hope for the best, but you just don't know.
Yeah, and to Beamer's point, yeah, if he did get approved last second, you could roll him out there, but it'd be tough, man. Could you, especially, I feel like, so ideally it's right now, obviously. The next step, not quite ideally, but right below that would be, okay, can you at least get the guy approved before preseason ball, gets here? Then the next step would be, all right, once you get into that final maybe 2 weeks, I would say, and then especially the final week leading up to game day, you're into the game plan at that point. We're not doing fundamentals. We're not doing install. We're getting ready for Virginia Tech. And then that's when I think to me, it's not even so much Oscar Attaway and his reps. That's when you're saying, all right, Matthew Fuller and Jawan Howell, we got to work overtime to get you guys ready. Like we kind of have to double down on giving the two of you reps because that's when, one of those guys is all of a sudden you're number two at that point. And, I think you got to get those guys ready anyway from a big picture, season standpoint. I always look at it like you go into a game, you need two backs, and you really need a third, but you might not necessarily use them. You go into a season, honestly, you want five, in my opinion. But, and right now you're sitting there in terms of recruited scholarship guys, you're sitting there at 4 with Faison.
Sure.
So you can go into a game and you're fine, but you go into a season, you start talking about 3 guys plus Bradley Dunn, who was a former walk-on. That's not ideal, man.
And there's always a possibility. I go back to the Tez Walker thing a couple years ago with North Carolina, where when Carolina played them in week number 1, he wasn't eligible, and I think it was mid-October before he finally got the approval from the NCAA. Now, yes, they since have launched a lawsuit because that was half the season that he was not able to be on the field and thus violate his antitrust and NIL earning opportunities and all those kind of things. But we do have a history of the NCAA approving guys in season for whatever reason. Now, the NCAA pushed back and said, oh, they didn't send us this form or something that we had asked for. North Carolina said they did, so that was a little bit of a sticky situation there. But it could be, hey, you're in the last week of September, first week of October, and then you get them back. So there's a lot of possibilities on the table here of what you could be encountering. And again, by the end of the week, we'd love to get thumbs up and wouldn't have to worry about this anymore. But again, it's been an ongoing story for the past several months, and who knows when it ends.
Yeah, and I think, man, it very much helps that you have Darren Heitner involved with this. And, I know anytime you have a situation like this, people want for somebody to blame. They want to point fingers. They want to talk about, your compliance office, all that stuff. Dealing with the NCAA is a different it's just a different thing, man. And I think with Heitner, he has direct experience with this exact thing. And I think he knows what arguments to go for. He knows what arguments to maybe avoid. He's had quite a bit of success. And perhaps even most importantly, man, he has a reputation at this point where I don't know if the NCAA necessarily wants to have to deal with him. And so, I think there's maybe a little bit of a fear factor there potentially as well. So I think I do think, I know people have lost a little bit of hope. I do think Faison will ultimately get cleared. People want to know when. I don't know if anybody can answer when, because even the people, like Beamer said, even the people that are like in that building over there a few miles from us, they've expected it to be, expected to happen already, and it has not.
Yeah, so again, we'll follow that as the summer rolls along, and hopefully we can get an answer before the season does start. As Wes mentioned a few minutes ago, busy weekend from a recruiting standpoint. Lots of guys visiting campus to start off the month of June. We'll dive into what happened over the weekend. Coming up next, it is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
All right, folks, if you want to watch your favorite sporting events with that big, brand new, hung-on-the-wall TV, surround sound, all the fixings, hit up our friends at Integrated Media, integratedmediainc.com, 803-948-8327. The beauty of it is they can do about anything for you involving your home theater, your TV, your internet, anything involving the electronics at your house, or even, sometimes you don't think about this, if you want to kind of take that next upgrade in terms of your home security systems and then tie it all together into a touchpad situation where you can control everything right there from one spot in your home. They can do that too. They've been to my home. They've been to Chris's. You can trust them to come out and not only come up with a plan for you, but also do outstanding work for you. Super professional, super easy to deal with, and I could not recommend them more. Again, integratedmediainc.com. Give them a call, 803-948-8327.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Wes along with you here on your Monday on the game as we navigate our way through the summer. Not a whole lot happening in terms of on-the-field stuff, but this is where recruiting really starts to tick up. And this past weekend was a very, very busy one when it came to a lot of visitors on the campus for the first full weekend of recruiting over the course of the summer. And I thought it was funny kind of reading your reports and the emphasis on how many times these guys get fed over the course of the weekend. Dinner at the Beamer's house, one of the breakfasts at Colonial Life Re and another one at a hotel overlooking the city. They make sure these guys are well fed throughout the course of the weekend. Yeah, it's impossible to go hungry while on an OV. And then I think you even get a food truck on the way out of town. That's right, food truck as well. Options. So definitely lots of food, lots of hanging out. Apparently, I'm interested to see when the photo shoots are going to come out. You know, the guys start posting them on social media. Yep. I haven't really looked in the last hour. I don't know if any of them have come out, but apparently, you know, the photo shoots are always cool, but the guys I talked to were just raving about the photo shoot this time. So they said it was next level. We'll be curious to see that. And, yeah, good weekend. South Carolina hosted 8 official visitors. At least one that we know of, a 2027 guy made the trip in as well, 4-star. Quentin Cipher, who's a linebacker that Carolina is heavily involved with, lots of mutual interest there. And, yeah, you know, I tried to warn people a little bit ahead of time, like, hey, these guys, I think just about all of them, except for Anthony Baxter, who's already committed to South Carolina, they all have kind of a summer or a June full of visits set. Yeah. So, you know, you may occasionally snag a commitment or two from a guy who just says, nope, I'm not going to take my visits. I'm done. I still think there's a chance, you know, at least maybe one of these guys that would be in that category goes ahead and does that. But for the most part, you know, you're talking about, so the 8 guys, one's already committed, and then, like I said, one of them may go ahead and make a commitment. You're talking about 6 guys that have visits set elsewhere, and they're going to take those visits. So it's going to be a little bit more of a slow burn. You're trying to set a high bar early on. A lot of these guys, it's, you know, their first or second official visit, because some people did take a few in the spring, and then you're just hoping you did enough to hold on. And we talk about this a lot. There's a lot of benefit into being the last visit for somebody because, again, they've seen everybody, and if you're the choice they like the best, they can make that commitment right away. What's the benefit to getting in on these guys early and being that first round of visits as, again, a lot of these guys have busy summers going to a lot of places? Yeah, you know, I think there's pros and cons to that. A lot of people maybe subscribe to the theory of, I want the last visit. I do think there's a little bit of, you know, validity to that. At the same time, you know, if you're the right fit for a guy, then sometimes you can go ahead and establish a lead so early, so quickly that it doesn't fade. And that there is an advantage to some guys get as fun as OVs are. You can get kind of tired out, man. A lot of it is the same stuff. Sure. So anytime you experience something for the first time, it maybe stands out to you a little bit more. So I do view, you know, all things being equal, especially if somebody's taking 4 or 5, you know, give me the last one. But, you know, if somebody's going to take 10 visits or something and just go everywhere, maybe there's some value to going ahead and, you know, setting the standard for everybody else to have to live up to. And then, like I said, there is always an occasion or two where maybe there are other visits planned and you're just like, hey, this is where I want to be. Why would I take these other trips? I do think South Carolina probably, when you start looking at who's coming in the other 2 weekends, probably some guys they were a little bit further down the road with in terms of just being an early leader already, where I think you could see them close out some recruitments, whereas, again, you're talking about I think they made a big move with Carter Meadows. For those who don't know, he's a 5-star edge prospect, number 2 edge in the country, according to On3. I think they made a major move with him. I don't know if it could have gone any better. Sterling Lucas has done an outstanding job there, but he's a very just deliberate, thoughtful, mature kid. He had 4 visits set from the very beginning. He's got a lot of respect for all the coaches, all the schools.
it was going to be borderline impossible to get a kid with that mindset to just lock it down in week one. So you're trying to set the standard for everybody else.
Well, and he's also from that, DMV area that South Carolina's also obviously recruited very, very well. And you have to think, seeing the success of a guy like Dylan Stewart, also from that general area as well, is something that could play into South Carolina's advantage if they do end up landing him. And he's a 2026 guy, so that commitment would be coming within the next couple of months.
Yeah, and would be just a perfect scenario for South Carolina's edge room and defensive line group. If you look at the possibility, obviously you're talking about class of 2026 guys, so he would be coming in next season. The potential of having a junior Dylan Stewart, then a Carter Meadows coming in, possibly being that bookend for him, and then kind of taking over after Dylan graduates after 3 years, then I think that's a best case, a perfect scenario really for South Carolina. And it's kind of funny. You have South Carolina, then you have 3 Big Ten schools. So it feels like kind of an emerging trend, a little bit more of a Big Ten flavor to some of these recruitments. Same deal with Kari Adams, who's a 4-star corner that was on campus this weekend and is heavily considering South Carolina. A couple of the other guys, Travis Johnson, who's in here, has got some Big Ten flavor there as well. So it's funny how you come across different programs and opponents on the recruiting trail from year to year.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. I know we kind of get caught up in star ratings. Again, Carter Meadows is a 5-star according to On3, but I think it's just as important to look at what other schools are looking at them and which one they've narrowed down to their final couple. Look at a guy like P.J. Dean out of North Carolina, that 4-star, interior offensive lineman, and his final 3 as of right now are South Carolina, Georgia, and Ohio State. That's pretty darn good company to be in when you talk about the latter 2 there. That, again, kind of speaks to where he kind of views South Carolina in terms of making that final decision.
Yeah, and he is very kind of set on those 3. He's not going to do the kind of 4 or 5 different visits. I got the impression, he's enjoying the visits, but maybe isn't the guy that wants to go out there and see 100 schools. Like, he's just like, hey, I love these schools. I'm going to take my visits, and then let's get this thing over with. And so I think those 3 schools really have captured his attention. I think if it was right now, now this may be easy to say because it's been 1 visit. If it was right now, I think P.J. Dean would be going to South Carolina. Of course, man, people want predictions on stuff, but it's so difficult to say these days before the other visits have happened. Because obviously, and it's not just P.J. Dean thing, I'm just talking about in general, you're going to have the NIL involvement, what gets offered to a guy later on. It can shift so quickly, but I do think that's another guy. It feels like it went as well as it possibly could for South Carolina this past weekend with P.J. Dean, and that one's a kind of interesting recruitment in that he was originally recruited as an offensive lineman, and then it was like, well, he might play defense, and now it's like, no, he's playing defense. That's the plan, that's the goal, that's what he wants to do, and I do think it went a long way for him that when he started talking about D-line, South Carolina was one of the first schools to basically say, hey, he said he had a conversation with Beamer, and Beamer was like, oh, we've already seen your D-line film. We're cool with whatever you want to play. So I think that went a long way, and we'll see where things go. I mean, I think they put their foot forward with all 7 of these uncommitted guys. It's just, again, it's going to be a little bit more of a slow burn in terms of finding out, are you going to land them or not, just because of the logistics of how these things are set up right now.
One more thing on recruiting here, and I believe he'll be coming in this upcoming weekend, but a name that people are familiar with, Landon Duckworth, in the class of 2026 quarterback out of Alabama, had priorly committed to the Gamecocks, decommitted, but Wiltfong of On3 has given strong indication that they are trending towards landing him very soon here.
That's a Fong bomb, if you will.
Yes.
He has predicted Duckworth to the Gamecocks, and I mean, obviously that would be massive for Carolina to get him. He, has kind of, honestly, they were recruiting, 3 guys primarily in the QB room for that class, and it really kind of looked like it was emerging to an extent of, all right, they're recruiting these other guys, but Duckworth is the one they want. And there was even a little bit, I saw some people, are they kind of putting all their eggs in one basket? And in a lot of ways, they kind of were. And honestly, I think to add some context here, I think there's a little aspect of, hey, Cutter Woods looked so good as a true freshman this spring. It almost gave you a little bit of a luxury to say, we're going to shoot for our top target here.
Sure.
And a lot of times you're shooting for a guy and you're saying, well, if we miss, you have to have plan B, plan C, plan D. It almost felt like they sort of said, you know what? Let's just put all of our resources into plan A.
Yeah.
And if we miss, we have this young quarterback already on campus, plus you always have the portal. And when you do that, you never know if it's going to pay off for you. It still hasn't gotten there yet, but this one may go completely full circle. Those who follow recruiting will know Duckworth committed to South Carolina originally years ago and decommitted, went back out, is going through the whole process, but it might be full circle with the Gamecocks.
Again, he's going to be in town this weekend. Also was in Auburn this past week, and will go to Florida State, Ole Miss, and believe also North Carolina a little bit as the summer rolls along.
Ole Miss is the other school to watch there. Like, not to downplay all the other schools, but it's mainly South Carolina, Ole Miss here.
Something to keep an eye on as the recruiting season rolls along in the summertime. Speaking of the recruiting weekend, what did Coach Beamer do to land some high-profile recruits in the past? Well, he used his singing voice. We'll let you hear about that coming up next. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
Our friends over at Game Day Men's Health can help you as a man reclaim your vitality by optimizing hormone levels. They specialize in TRT, or testosterone replacement therapy, which will help boost your energy and strength. And they're a lot different than other clinics that do similar things. They have in-house labs that can deliver your results in just 15 minutes. They're conveniently located in Northeast Columbia near I-77 and Two Notch Road. Comfortable man cave style clinics with TVs and refreshments while you wait. Also great, they don't use any long-term contracts. Flexible plans tailored to your needs. TRT tests available to check your levels with absolutely no obligation, and then ongoing monitoring committed to your success with expert guidance. You can get started by going to gamedaymenshealth.com/North-Columbia. Again, located just off I-77, or give them a call, 803-265-3161.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Wes along with you on your Monday here on the game, recapping what was a busy recruiting weekend. How far would you as a coach go to land a big-time recruit? Well, Coach Beamer's not afraid to pick up the microphone and do just that as he discussed his go-to karaoke's and which assistant is the favorite when it comes to karaoke with recruits over the weekend.
You know, when I have broken out the karaoke, I don't know if any of y'all are in the country music, but you can't go wrong with a lot of Sam Hunt's songs when it goes to karaoke. So I'm convinced that the reason Marquis Anderson and I think Blake Franks, I'm trying to think who all was on that official visit weekend. It was a group of guys that we had here a few years ago, and I'm convinced that the reason they became Gamecocks was because of my my rendition of Sam Hunt's song "Make You Miss Me" was really, really good. Really, the star, believe this or not, the star guy that really gets into the karaoke is Torian Gray, our defensive backs coach. So he'll be the first one to kick it off tonight. And if anybody else gets an opportunity, it will only be because Torian takes a break from singing.
Does that surprise you at all that Torian Gray is the karaoke master?
Yes. Yeah. If you gave me, wow, T. Gray. Okay. If you gave me 5 guesses, I don't think of all the coaches, I don't think that T. Gray would have been one of the guesses.
Who would have been like your first guess?
You know, I could see Sean Elliott just grabbing the mic, like going. He's an offensive guy, but he actually was a former defensive lineman.
Right.
I could see Sean Elliott like rushing the stage and grabbing the mic.
Like Sean not being afraid to do it because he's just so intense and fun. Like, I don't care how I sound. I'm going to go up there and do it anyway.
You know, the Gamecock Club did the Darius Rucker concert, and several of the coaches were up on stage, and our guy Sean Elliott was having the time of his life up there. He was, like, pointing to people in the crowd, waving, like, involving everyone. I can see that. But T. Gray is a little bit of a shocker there, just in my opinion. But the we have heard Beams on the mic in the locker room.
Yeah,
remember?
That's true. Yep.
So
what was the song they sang to Emily after one of the games last year?
Oh, what was it? The Fantasia?
Yeah, that one. So yeah, he's not afraid. And hey, he's good enough to get a couple of higher profile guys like Marquis Anderson and Blake Franks. Singing must be pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, fortunately for Coach, I don't remember them mentioning that in their post-commitment interview, but I'm sure they just didn't want to give away his secrets.
Yeah, that would be, now that you know this, when talking to these recruits, you need to ask them about the karaoke and what kind of influence that had.
Yes,
like,
for sure.
Did Beamer singing convince you to commit or not?
When I See You is the name of that Fantasia song,
yes, yeah, that's it. Yeah, he did pretty good with that. No,
he hit that thing with some confidence.
Yeah.
So
apparently, big Sam Hunt fan as well. I could see those songs being fun karaoke songs. You got to go to karaoke song?
No, it's been so long. I got to say, though, the great karaoke song is the Blame It All on My Roots. I Showed Up in Boots.
Okay.
Ruined Your Black Tie Affair.
Something people that can sing along with.
Yes, everybody's got to get involved.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
So, Coach Beamer, Coach Gray, karaoke aficionados, who knew? That'll do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show, myself, Jack Beltry, up next on your Monday here on the game.
All right, folks, before I get out of here, let me tell you about our friends over at Firehouse Subs. FirehouseSubs.com is the way to order, or just do what we do. Download the Firehouse Subs app, hit that rapid rescue to go, save all your orders so that they're going to be sitting there waiting for you next time you order, make it super simple for you. You're running out of time.